So welcome everyone to our session on the fourth aggregate. So we work our way through the five aggregates. We've looked at the aggregate of body or rupa, material formations, feeling tone, the second one, or vedana, sense of pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, and perceptions. That sense of how we perceive our sensory experience that gives it meaning, labels, the sound bird and so on. And this one, we're looking at sankhara. Perhaps you've heard that word, sankhara, the Pali word. It's translated as things like mental fabrications or mental formations, mental construction. And it's basically kind of our conditioned response to the objects received through the six sense organs when contact happens. Now, this talk, a lot of times people will talk about volition. I don't know if you've listened to talks on the five aggregates before, but many people will pick out volition or intention because it's such a powerful aspect of sankharas. The Buddha actually listed 52 mental formations in the Abhidhamma, which is kind of the Buddhist psychology manual, you could say, the Abhidhamma. It's a heavy, fairly intense read, very thick. It takes a while to work your way through it. And in there, he lists these 52 mental formations. And two of them are actually feeling, tone, and perception. And then the other 50 are all kinds of thoughts and emotions that can arise, and volition or intention. So I always like to talk about, if you look at that list, the vast majority of them are thoughts and emotions. And so I like to at least start. I mean, next week, if we want to, we can look at intention or volition as looking at that in terms of not self, right? Because that's what the aggregates, we're looking at how they're not self. Then, like the other aggregates, we're seeing that they're also impermanent, a constant state of change with no permanent substance or entity or essence. That's what we keep going back to with these five aggregates. It's no different than when we look at mental formations, and in this case, thoughts. So the Buddha gave remember the metaphors that the Buddha gave for each of the five aggregates? The mirage was perception and so on. Foam was body. The metaphor for mental formations is the plantain tree or a banana tree, a tree that's hollow in the middle. And if you cut it open, you'll find that it's empty. It's hollow. There's no evidence of any heart wood in the plantain tree. And similarly, when we investigate mental formations and thoughts, they appear to be empty, without any substantive entity or self behind or in control of them. In that guided meditation, I was trying to point that out by starting with sounds, because we don't tend to identify with sounds as a self, right? We tend to just see sounds as events arising. And so it's very easy to just kind of allow sounds to arise as events and not identify with them or attach to them in any way. Claim them as something that you're in control of, right? So I start with sound just to get you the feel for just seeing things arising and passing. And then you go to thoughts. And can you then look at thoughts in the same way as just events arising in the mind? Same way that sounds arose to the ear. And if you in your practice, you can kind of begin to just see thoughts as events arising in the mind. I used to refer to them as secretions of the mind. The mind just secretes thoughts, and for some reason that image kind of rung true for me. That when I came up with that, my mind was secreting thoughts continuously, it seemed. So just if we can see that that's all that's happening, is the mind is secreting thoughts, they're just events in the mind, then we're not attached to them, right? And if we're not attached to them or identified with them, then we don't struggle with them. We can just let them be. And if we don't struggle with them, then we can just let them be. Then what emerges? What emerges when there's no struggle with the present moment? Have you noticed what emerges? Like, just do that right now. We'll just settle into the present moment without any struggle with what's present, not wanting anything to be different than it is right now. What emerges? Of course, thoughts might have arisen, but if you're just letting them be, or sounds might have arisen, but you just let them be. What arises is actually your natural state. This is your essence. Who you are behind all the struggle is this stillness and peace that's always there. Right? So you don't have to go anywhere. It's not something that happens in the future. It happens right now. I hope you had the chance to just taste it in this very moment. Have you ever noticed that thoughts just come, whether you want them or not? Right? If thoughts were your essence or a self, then if you wanted to stop them, you could just stop them. But they're just happening, and often frequently. And for many people, and I'd say, the majority of people that I come into contact with in teaching this, thoughts are just, it's like this continuous self-talk, this narrative that just won't shut up. Many people are disturbed by it. I did a session with sort of a mindfulness meditation with the boomerang group, and it was on this topic at a different level, of course, not in terms of the aggregates, but just how we relate to thoughts. And I asked the question, there are, I think, 50 odd people there. How many people see their thoughts, their mind's just too busy, that it causes them stress? And pretty much every hand went up. So people do struggle with this, that thoughts come uninvited without our consent. And often when we might prefer some peace and quiet, thoughts just keep coming, right? And we don't need to struggle with thoughts. This is, I think you guys get this. And when you teach a beginner mindfulness class, people kind of go, oh, don't I have to stop them? Don't I follow my breath so that I can stop my thoughts? But you guys get that we're not doing that. We're not trying to stop our thoughts. We're simply allowing them to arise, show up on the movie screen, and then pass. Because if we struggle with them, of course, they will persist. What resists persists, or actually what we resist actually intensifies, in my experience. So there's no need to fight with them, struggle with them, judge them. Just be aware of them once they have arisen. No need to follow the train of thought or try to stop the trains from arriving. We're taking the metaphor a bit too far here, but just try to stop the trains or get on the trains. And sometimes you get on the train and you're down a few stops. You don't even know you got on the train, right? And then you realize, I'm lost in thought. I'm on the thought train. That's not a problem. You get off the next stop and you just come back to where you started, to the present moment. In fact, thoughts and emotions of the 5 aggregates, and within this aggregate of mental formations, thoughts and emotions are the only aspects of the aggregates that we have this kind of adversive relationship to it. In my experience, we don't try to stop the other aggregates. We identify with them, but we don't have this kind of deep adversive relationship. So it's important to look and see when this happens. See if there's an aversion arising to thoughts. I have a really interesting quote here from Pema Chodron. When thoughts arise, it might occur to you to wonder where they came from. Where do they come from? It seems as if they come from nowhere. You're just faithfully following your breath, and wham, you're in Hawaii surfing. Where did it come from? And where does it go? Big drama, big dramas happening, big dramas. And it's 9:30 in the morning. Ooh, wow, this is extremely heavy. A car honks and suddenly you're not in the drama anymore. You're in another drama. I was once instructed to meditate on thoughts. I investigated the nature of thoughts for 2 whole months. I can tell you firsthand that you can never find a thought. There's nothing there of substance, but with our minds, we make it an extremely big deal. So Pema meditated on thoughts for 2 months, and she can tell you firsthand that she can never find a thought. But geez, we sure place a lot of importance on them, right? We really do. We identify with them. They really, in many ways, construct our sense of self. Like, who are you before you have a thought about who you are? Right? So when you think about who am I, who are you before you have a thought about it? So we even identify ourselves through thoughts about who we think we are. The Buddha said that we are shaped, created, and led by our thoughts. And he is the quote from the Buddha: "We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. Speak or act with an impure mind, and trouble will follow you as the wheel follows the ox that draws the cart." So thoughts are very important. And that's why I like to pick it out as one of the mental formations and work with it. And probably because in my personal practice, I had a lot of challenges with thoughts arising and pulling me into emotional states. Even in, so this is, I would kind of look and say, wow, I just, this thought train just keeps coming up, and it's pulled me down into a depression or into anxiety. So what is this? How can this be so powerful that it can change how my mood in such a deep, fundamental way without my consent? So I really started to investigate. So there's lots of opportunity to investigate thoughts. How do we practice with thoughts? I'll just go in, I'll say a few words about this, because again, this is all about practice, right? And again, don't believe me that you're not your thoughts, or our thoughts are not facts. You need to investigate for yourself that thoughts are not facts and that you are not your thoughts. So you have lots of opportunities to practice, because people think between 12,000 and 60,000 thoughts per day. It's a big range. I was kind of, when I read that, I thought, that's a big range. I don't know where I fall, because I've never tried to actually count them. So, but that might be something to do. Although, if you sat there and waited so that you could count them, you'd probably only have like 1,000. Have you noticed that? Like in the meditation, when I said, sit and wait for thoughts and observe thoughts, that as you can sit and wait and no thoughts show up sometimes. But for me, it's more likely that thoughts won't show up when I have that stance towards them, right? Just waiting, with awareness for a thought to appear. And where are the thoughts, right? So I have a feeling if I sat there and I was going to spend a day and just count them all, there would probably be many, many fewer than there would be on a normal day. So we practice by observing these 12,000 to 60,000, the process, I should really say, of the arising of these 12 to 60,000 thoughts, the process of thinking. So you're observing that, really the process, because you're in a way you're observing the content, but you're just letting the content go, right? It's just arising and passing away. The content is like the actual story. He said, she said, I did, he did, she did, they did. What am I going to do? What are they going to do? So, it's all that. Well, that's all the content. The process is just how thinking arises, happens in the mind. The visual or auditory images that arise in the mind that we call thoughts. Some people, it's words. Other people, it's more image oriented. And for some, it's even auditory. So people experience thoughts in different ways, right? So we're just observing that process. And we just watch. And what's important to notice is what hooks us. Right. So if you just sit and watch thoughts arising, lingering, passing away, rise, arise, arise, pass away, it actually becomes very peaceful, and you kind of merge into your natural state of being, into a kind of being mode. And then something might come and then hook you. It's got some juice. So a story emerges around it. Papancha emerges. And then just look to see, what is that? That's where the word noting is helpful. Oh, that's that story. Wow, I keep seeing that story over and over again. It's amazing how much power I give that story. And you'll see that. It's amazing. unknowingly giving power to an uninvited thought. To do this or say that, to plan, obsess, to judge. So when we bring this kind of awareness or mindfulness, we could say it helps us to bring all these thoughts. So they're at the level where we're conscious of it, is another way to put it. Because many of our thoughts happen at kind of just below consciousness. I would say the majority actually happen kind of just below that level of consciousness, that there's this thought train that's happening, and then it pops into awareness every once in a while, something with juice. But we're noticing them all, and when you really settle and don't struggle with any thought train, you start to really notice the variety of thoughts that just arise. The fleeting thoughts just arise into awareness. And then you also start to see that choices arise in how or whether you react to them, right? Because there's that space. Thought is seen. It seems like it's got a fair bit of pull, but you have a choice in whether or how you react or respond to them. So seeing that you are not your thoughts is really observing and contemplating the ways in which we relate to thoughts. Do we identify with thoughts? Are we identified with them? Do we believe everything that pops in our head to be true? Do we believe that these thoughts that pop into our heads represent who we are as a person? Ask yourself that. It's an important question. Do you believe that these thoughts that pop into your head represent who you are as a person? Are you the voice behind your thoughts? So in many ways, we're conditioned to believe that thoughts represent who we are as a person, and that we're the voice behind our thoughts. And superficially, this seems to make sense, right? What's more, is there anything more personal than our thoughts? Say thoughts and emotions. Seems very personal. At the superficial level, they seem very personal. So we've created a person, a somebody, a me from these thoughts. Because thoughts occur in my mind alone, and I'm the only one who will ever experience them. So couldn't that represent my true self? I mean, that's the kind of superficial way that we often look at and relate to our thoughts. This internal dialogue, this internal narrative that narrates and interprets every moment of our life. It's kind of like I had a teacher, somebody I can't remember which teacher, used to call it, it's like having an inner roommate that never shuts up, just comments on everything. So if you actually had a person that commented the way your mind narrative does, would you even tolerate that person? I mean, it's almost like for me at least, I mean, everybody's different, but for me at least, when I heard that, I could really relate to it because, yeah, geez, my mind really does just comment and interpret and have opinions and about everything. It's like I can't even keep track of what I believe or what I think, because it's just there's so much of it going on. So you just kind of look at this inner roommate that's talking. It's kind of at a first, this is many years ago, at a first kind of the stage of relating, that kind of being the objective third person, witnessing person, was very helpful as a practice. So um, that may be something that is helpful for you as well. I don't know. So are you a chooser, a creator of your thoughts? Or do they just exist independently? They just arise. Because I think if you watch thoughts long enough, you start to see that there's no chooser behind the thoughts that arise. The perceived experience of choosing our thoughts is simply another thought that we misattribute to a story of self. Right? Sam Harris suggests a similar view. I have a short quote from him. We few people were there when we were looking at Sam Harris's view of free will. And I brought in a talk by Sam Harris. He's a controversial character, but he's written a book called Free Will. Talks about how we don't actually have, in our traditional conception of free will, there is no free will. He says, we are not authoring our thoughts. We can't choose them before we think them. That would require that we think them before we think them. Typical Sam Harris circular logic. Eckhart Tolle, who struggled a lot with thoughts, said, to realize that you are not your thoughts is when you begin to awaken spiritually. So to realize that you are not your thoughts is really the kind of a stepping stone into a spiritual awakening. And I really deeply feel what he says. And I was pointing to that in the guided meditation, that when we don't identify with our thoughts, we don't struggle with our thoughts and emotions, I would say, we can, our natural state, our divine nature, Buddha nature, our natural state starts to shine through. The veil that's covering it of all these aggregates, all this cloud cover starts to clear, and the sky, if you want to use the metaphor of the sky, is our natural state. So the sky is always there. There's just clouds and storms that pass through it. Its natural state is still skyness. And that's similar with our true nature. When all this clutter, in many ways, I look at it as clutter, these thoughts, emotions, perceptions, pleasant and Vedana, all this unfolding is just happening within our true nature, within our sky nature. So it's none of this causes suffering, right? Thoughts don't cause suffering or unhappiness. It's when we identify and attach ourselves to them. When we see them as a self, this is what causes dukkha, this is what causes suffering. So they can all arise, all this stuff can arise in the sky. None of it need upset the sky in any way. So mindfulness is a very useful tool when we're experiencing runaway thoughts. Can we just allow them to enter awareness, notice them, instead of being invested in them in any way? So in many ways, you're using, in this practice, you're using the mind to untangle your identification with the mind. It's really what what I'm pointing to here is practice. So I'll open it up to some questions. So we see what's on people's minds.